the part two Wilson's looking for?
I'm just gonna kind of go over.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Okay.
Youthling, Jody's here.
I think I did really good on the history section of the ACT.
There's a history section.
The writing one. The writing one though.
I know you can't tell me the prompt, but
She wrote it in boarding.
how many of
It was
you
so easy. What was the girl's name?
used this style to attack the prompt or something like it?
Yeah. Thank you.
It's not the way,
All I saw
it's
was right.
a way.
Yeah, I like looked at the.
Yeah,
That's
me
what I
too.
remember.
Soren,
Because I can never remember.
Seems like
Logan, yes. Edie, yes.
Yeah.
Tyler's here. Brody's here. Liz.
She just kind of.
Kayla,
never even know
Huerta,
if in the
Ian,
classroom.
Tyler is here. Bryn is here. Riley is. Riley. Is that Riley?
Yeah.
Here. Ianka. Yeah. Dawson, Benjamin, Jack, Spencer, Allie Strunke. Allie?
It's what?
I wonder if we're having refunds.
When's Nick's birthday?
And Sean.
Isn't it the 16th? No, St. Patrick's Day is the 17th.
Darn it. I thought today was the 16th.
It's on Sunday. Well,
The only reason why we're going to cover new material the day before spring break, which I normally would not, is because we are so far behind right now. Because I haven't seen you since Monday. Not your fault, but holy cow, Tuesday you had the ACT. Hopefully you raised the bar, right? And then Wednesday you had the work keys, and then Thursday I wasn't here, but
where were you?
I was at the district office making very important decisions. But I made this cheat sheet for you. I hope this was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So good. I'm glad that was useful. And so the paper's due tonight, midnight ish. I want to cover a few things, and then I do want to give you time to work on that paper. Those of you who haven't turned it in, I'm here to answer any questions. I'm here to help. But let's cover some things so that we're not totally just racing through things after spring break. The date for the next testing window is right there, and we are not where we should be through. Okay, any questions on Sejul? We're good.
So how many days behind are we?
3. Okay. You've already seen this, but just as a reminder, this is what Wilson said was the U.S.'s goal for entering into World War I. I should turn this on. Oh, it isn't. So Britain's fighting to protect its colonies and maybe take away Germany's colonies. And France is fighting to protect its colonies and maybe take away Austro-Hungarian colonies. And the Germans are fighting to protect their colonies and maybe win some of Britain's colonies. And right, the Europeans are fighting for selfish, petty reasons. And since the French and Indian War, they've been fighting wars about empire. And what do? We fight for noble reasons. We're fighting to end war forever. By ending what caused the war, Wilson believed that we would end war, which you might think, you're so naive. But, I mean, these are admirable things. Maybe he was a bit naive, but they are admirable things. In order to win the war, this is often one of the paradoxes of American history. Right now I'm engaging in what's called contextualization. I'm sort of giving you the big picture. But it is often during a war that rights are giveth and rights are taketh away. It is during war when women are given more of a role. And people say, wow, they can do it. Because the men are off fighting and the women take the place of the men in the factories. And then people realize, oh, wow, look at that. You did. Okay. It is during war when minorities, blacks, are given more rights, right? It was during this Civil War when blacks were allowed to fight for the first time. And it's, wow, they can do it. Blacks were allowed to fight in a segregated unit in the U.S. military during World War I. So the U.S. giveth, but the U.S. taketh away, right? So you are looking at various laws that were passed during World War I, which you might argue were of questionable legality. Why is it that? For example, the Sedition Act. The Sedition Act, which basically outlawed, let's not show that yet, outlawed criticism of the government. You were not allowed to criticize the US government because of the Sedition Act of 1918. Hey, by the way, we've looked at a Sedition Act before. Remember? Who remembers? Sedition Act. What was it?
We read a paper on it.
Yeah, you wrote a paper on it. Yes. What was it? Very good. Who was president that was worried about his presidency? John Jay? Never was president.
No, I'm just saying they had J.
They had a J in it, yes.
Yeah, I don't remember.
John?
Jackson?
John Adams.
John Adams. Very good. So John Adams. The US was only about 15 years old at the time, and there was this real concern that the US government would not last. So we've got to prevent criticism. So the original Sedition Act of it was like 1798 or something like that. Version number 2, the Sedition Act of 1918, which outlawed criticism of the war effort. You could not criticize the draft, which, by the way, the draft. What does a draft tell you about the popularity of a war?
It's not very popular.
Explain.
So if they're trying to drive, it means that they don't have enough soldiers, not enough people enlisting to go fight in the war.
Very good. Where are the volunteers? If this is such a sweeping, popular war, if we're fighting for all those noble reasons, where are all the volunteers? Another criticism of the Draft Act, was it violated the 13th Amendment. What was the 13th Amendment? What is the 13th Amendment? Who remembers the 13th Amendment? It's one of the Civil War amendments. It's a biggie.
They're the
I
amendments.
don't know.
Was that everyone has equal rights?
That's the 14th.
Was it
Outlawing slavery and-
Slavery. No more slavery. No more slavery. And then they passed this law, which says, by the way, you have to fight for the United States. Some people said, that's slavery. Forced labor against my will. Labor against my will is slavery. The draft is unconstitutional because it's slavery. And the guy that made that argument was arrested for violating the Sedition Act. Personally secede. I'm personally going to secede and then declare war on Liv. Punch her in the nose. And then when I get arrested, I'll say, no, that's okay. Punching people in the nose is legal in my country.
Because he criticized the draft.
Yeah. The War Industries Board, again, all of these are an expansion of government power during war. And that's, by the way, the justification. Yep, we are violating the Constitution. Deal with it. We sure are, because built into the Constitution is permission to violate the Constitution. So here's a conundrum. By violating the Constitution, were they violating the Constitution? If part of it says go ahead and violate the Constitution, and they do violate the Constitution, are they violating the Constitution?
Yes, Andrew.
It's one of those endless loop thingies, right? Right? Like this statement right here. Ready? Listen. This sentence, which I am now uttering, is a lie.
What was
Because if
born-
it's a lie, then it's true. But if it's true, then it's not a lie.
What's first? The chicken and the egg.
You want to know the answer?
Really?
The egg.
No.
Yes, the egg was.
No, it is the egg.
a different-
Of course, my statement is based on whether or not you accept as scientific fact the theory of evolution. If you're going Bible on me, this conversation is over. I'm not saying you can't believe in the Bible. Go ahead, believe in the Bible. But if you believe the Bible is a story and that we actually evolved, then the egg must have been first because the egg came out of a not quite chicken, which gave birth to a chicken. Egg. And a tree falling where there's no one to hear it does not make a sound. sound. Sound is in your head. There is no sound out there. Sound is your brain interpreting waves in the air. It's all in here, as well as color. Color is all in here. If I switched eyeballs with you, I would say, why is the flag green, purple, and yellow? Because your eyes see color differently than my eyes. We're just checking off things that, don't they know? Don't they know? Okay, right. Let's keep going. The War Industries Board was the U.S. government telling Ford to make tanks. No way that would be done outside of war, right? Who's the government to tell companies what to make? If you want to make a product, go ahead and make it. But not during a war. During a war, you will make what we tell you to make. Tanks, guns, uniforms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The War Industries Board. It's an expansion of government power. The Espionage Act, I don't even know what that is. It prevented some. Espionage and Sedition Act were similar. One prevented criticism of the war, and the other prevented.
That's not helpful. That better not be on the test.
What did
But that'll be one of the options.
espionage?
The Espionage Act prevented, and it'll actually be that answer right there. Oh, I know what my new picture that I'll send you every day over spring break will be.
Who wants to send a petition to cancel our mine?
But then we wouldn't talk about the damage. Just
Yay. Okay. Last one here, and then I'll explain what this is. 18th Amendment.
Yeah, I like that.
I like
You like that one?
Maddie
I like
drew
his
a
hat.
Who's Maddie?
I didn't draw that. Who drew that?
Maddie did.
That's adorable.
Isn't it?
18th Amendment, which, who knows? Again, this is one of these giveth, taketh, voided by another amendment. Very good. Prohibition, right? It outlawed the manufacture, distribution, and sale of alcohol. Notice what it did not outlaw.
Consumption.
Drink it. Go ahead. You just cannot make it, buy it, or sell it. What's the logic?
It'll eventually disappear.
It'll eventually disappear, right? They were not going to take away your nice little storage of wine that you've been gathering for generations, right? Fine, keep it. But no more manufacture, distribution, and sale. True or false? The 18th Amendment is still there.
Yes.
It is still there, right? It's just that there's another amendment saying ignore that amendment. The word slavery is still in the U.S. Constitution. It's just that there are amendments that say scratch that, right? Nothing in the Constitution has ever been deleted. It's just that there are been things added to it which say, yeah, ignore that part. Okay, it's all there still, right? This is the Supreme Court decision, and I will look at it one slide at a time, where these things were upheld by the United States Supreme Court as being constitutional, even though they violated the Constitution. Because of the part that says, go ahead and violate the Constitution. When?
Under war.
Times of crisis, right? The language is fuzzy. And this is where Trump has a bit of ammunition as far as the border, right? So just synthesis right now. Trump asked Congress to give him money to pay for a wall between the United States and Mexico. The Congress said, no, we're not doing that. Trump then declared a national emergency, which gives him extraordinary powers because he's the president. He can declare a national emergency. So right now at the border is equivalent to World War I, according to Trump. They're about the same. And this gives him the authority to build the wall without congressional approval. Now, if you're following that story, what happened yesterday, or was it the day before, is extraordinary. The U.S. Senate, which has a majority of Republicans, passed a bill that said, no, President, you can't do that. These are Republicans voting against a Republican president. So this is fairly unusual. Trump will veto it, and then we'll see if there are enough votes to override the veto. We'll see. Okay. Anyway, what's going on here? So this guy, his name is Schenck, and he showed up at a recruiting station. This was the U.S. military recruiting people to join the military, and he handed out little pamphlets saying the draft was unconstitutional because it violated the 13th Amendment. He made brochures and he handed them out to people. He's violated, you're exactly right. So he was arrested. He said, resistance of the draft is an American's duty. You guys are like convicts or slaves. He was arrested and he argued, wait, what about my First Amendment freedom of speech? I have the right to say what I want to say. And the court said, not during a time of crisis, not during a time of crisis. During a time of crisis, the U.S. government taketh away. Taketh away because the war effort is so vital that too bad. Too bad your individual rights have been violated. Too bad. When the war's over, enjoy your rights again. Which is sort of interesting because that means that when the U.S. is at war, your rights are violated. Acceptingly, right? What's the last war the United States, where the United States declared war? Last war. When's the last time the U.S. declared war? World War II. We declared war against Bulgaria. That was 1942. So the U.S. hasn't been in any war since then.
Not necessarily.
Obviously, that is incorrect. As a matter of fact, I would argue we've been in constant war since then. Constantly. And what happens during war? The U.S. government taketh away. And justifiably because we're at war. And so there are people that say what the U.S. government has been doing since World War II is just continually going to war so that Americans' rights can be violated. And you are fish. You are sheep. You are accepting of government violating your rights because we're at war all the time. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. It's kind of interesting. This is an actual poster that Americans saw during World War I. Criticism of society is not free speech, is the argument being made, which is interesting because I don't think so. I think that's exactly what free speech is. That to me is the definition of free speech. Who cares if you say red is pretty? First Amendment, no one gives a crap if you think red is pretty. But when you say we are wrong to go to war, or the draft is a violation of slavery, that's free speech, man. Now, careful, I am not saying hate speech. When you walk in this room with a t-shirt saying, I hate fags, I don't know if that's free speech. That's hate speech. There might be a difference between free speech and hate speech. Again, I'm not telling you that there's definitely a difference. I'm just inviting, we have to be careful. Free speech is not opening that door and screaming fire. And then when the cops come and the fire department comes and there's no fire and you're arrested, you say, First Amendment. No, that is not. First Amendment. It's lying. You do not have the right to go to the principal and say, Mr. Potter was selling drugs in the parking lot again.
You do sell candy to kids.
Yeah, that's not free speech.
Yeah.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
Hi,
Oh, did you catch the word again?
Yeah. Did that happen before?
I don't sell drugs
No, not that
in the
part.
parking lot.
Your neighbor.
You sell drugs in the school?
I wasn't on camera.
That little corner, it says you broke the Espionage Act,
Espionage.
and then under it, you are hurting war effort. So would that act be the war effort, and then the Sedition Act would just be like criticizing the government?
I bet you're right. Did you follow that? The Espionage Act would be criticizing, what was that again? You should look up the difference between these two because I don't remember.
Potter, are you in bed with your neighbor?
What?
No. Greatest Schoolhouse Rock.
I meant like in
Ever
business. I meant
created.
in business. Okay, that's probably.
Where's your mind at?
I meant.
What's the Espionage I said that the espionage was not allowed to criticize war efforts, and then the sedition was not allowed to criticize the government.
Why am I not hearing? Oh, that's. Why am I not hearing anything?
Did you turn on the speaker for this one?
Might as well criticize.
Let's start.
Is this the espionage act?
This is my favorite Schoolhouse Rock ever.
What's it about? Women's right to vote?
This is how it rocks.
Now you have heard of women's rights and how we tried to reach new heights. We were all created equal. That's us too. Yeah, but you will probably not recall that it's not been too long at all since we even had the right to cast a vote. Well, sure, some men bow down and call us misses. Then it's hang the watch out and wash the dishes. But when the time rolls around to elect a president, what did they say, sister? What did they say? They said, see you later, alligator. And don't forget my mashed potatoes, cause I'm going downtown to cast my vote for president. Oh, we were suffering until suffering. Not a woman who could vote no matter what age. And the 19th Amendment struck down that restricted rule. And now we pull down on the lever, cast our ballot, and we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and school. Those pilgrim women who braved the vote, they could cook the turkey, but they could not vote. Even Betsy Ross, who showed the flag, was left behind that first election day. Then Susan B. Anthony, and Julia Howe, Lucretia Mott, they showed us how they carried signs and marched in lines until at long last war was passed. Oh, we were suffering until suffering. Not a woman who could vote no matter what age. Then the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule. And now we cool down on the lever, cast our ballot, and we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and school. Yes, the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule. Yes, the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule. We got it now. Since 1920, sisters unite.
Is that not rock?
What does that have anything to do with what we're learning about?
19th Amendment! Passed during World War I. The government giveth and the government taketh away. Here's an example of the government giveth.
Everybody goes big.
No.
Just a bunch of random hoopla.
Hoopla! Anyway, so new note, 19th Amendment passed in 1920, granted women the right to vote at a national level. The way it's phrased, the way amendments are usually phrased is you cannot deny the right to vote based on blank. That's the third time, I think I've asked this question before, but that's the third time we've visited how do you deny the right to vote? In fact, I think it was her that shared with us. Do you remember what you said? In this class, when was the first time that the government changed who could vote? Land ownership, no more. And then what's the second time?
Race.
What? Race, 15th Amendment. Here's number 3.
Woman.
No more. You cannot deny the right to vote based on who owns it or doesn't own land. You cannot deny the right to vote based on what race people are. You cannot deny the right to vote based on gender. You can deny it based on other things. Age.
Yeah.
Right? How many of you got to vote in the last election?
You're cool, Potter.
I'm older than you. That's it. That's the only thing. I am older than you. That was the only qualification. Okay. Let's try just a few more things here and then we'll shift gears. So the numbers that you're looking at as far as casualties, by the way, we're not fighting World War I. We're not going to study the Battle of the Marne and the Battle of the Somme and all all these things. But the numbers here, no previous war is even close to the casualty rate of World War I. And it held that record for about 20 years. Okay, so number one is Russia, 9 million. Now, careful now, casualties doesn't mean deaths. Casualties means dead or badly injured. Injured seriously enough to warrant not really participating. Unable to fight. So, I mean, Russia's way up there. Germany's way up there. That shouldn't really surprise you. Austria, Hungary. The U.S., I would never test you on actual numbers, but what I do think is interesting, two things to note here. One, relatively speaking, the U.S. is kind of coming out pretty clean here, right? How many major World War I battles took place on American soil? There, right? No cities were devastated by sieges. Our soldiers went over there, and I mean, not even a million. I mean, not even 500,000. So that's one thing to note, is that the American experience of war is, relatively speaking, positive. We think war is a good way to solve problems. Hardly anyone dies, relatively speaking. And then number two, look at who lost more than anyone else. It's Russia. And why? Because Germany invaded them. Later on in this class, we'll study World War II. The country that would lose more than anybody else is the Soviet Union, Russia. And why? Because Germany invaded them. They are going to get sick of it. They're sick of being invaded by the Germans. And so after World War II, the Soviets would engage in behavior that would prevent being invaded anymore. We're sick of being invaded by the Germans, so here's what we're going to do. And that is called the Cold War. But you're looking at the beginning of the Cold War. Okay. Last thing I wanted to show you are just a bunch of cool things about World War I. I assume you studied World War I before, yes? When? You did. Okay. Yeah. So the global perspective. So did you look at like trench warfare and no man's land and all that crap? Okay. So trench warfare was actually invented during the American Civil War.
Yeah.
What you do is you come up with a strategy to defeat the enemy's strengths. And during the Civil War, the Union had horses. The South really didn't have all that many horses. So the South dug trenches because horses aren't really effective in trenches, right? So you dig trenches. And that was at the end of the American Civil War. The next major global war is World War I. And it's interesting because what usually happens is the next war begins the way the last war ended. So trench warfare was introduced in World War I. And so now you have to overcome that. And so the invention of tanks, which just goes over trenches, gas, which sinks into trenches, machine guns. Okay, so they come up with ways of defeating. Well, by the end of World War I, they come up with a way to defeat tanks, right? Air to surface missiles, like planes, helicopters that shoot tanks. So it's just kind of interesting. An actual photograph of soldiers in a trench. And you'll notice, do you notice that some of them are actually wearing gas masks? Right? And it's adorable that they thought that those things worked.
Please excuse the interruption. Sydney Cook, please come to the office. Sydney Cook.
By and large, they didn't really work. But you give a guy a mask, they think it works, then they'll fight. This is the first major war battle where Americans took place, is the Argonne Forest. I would never test you on that. But you can just see the devastation to the environment from World War I. That guy lost his face, and he was, World War I was the first war where prosthetics were used to fix soldiers, so they could get right back on the front line. I think I have a picture here. Yeah, look at it. It's an army of one-legged soldiers, and they'll get back to fighting with their new fake leg. Come a long way since then. How depressing that you can lose a leg and not even be sent home. They'll fix you and they'll send you right back. This is German, by the way. These are German soldiers. Flamethrowers, nasty little thing.
Invented by the Chinese.
Kind of cruel. It's been said that it takes war to really get man to be creative. That we're really creative when we come up with methods of execution, torture. I took a class in college called Methods of Execution. Every day, I would leave that class wanting to puke. Like, I would never be hungry. I had a classmate, he's a doctor now. Here I am. So anyway, we would meet for lunch, and he would take some disgusting biology class, and I would take that class, and it's like, I'm not hungry, are you? So we just sit. Anyway, you can see gas attack, right? They're wearing their masks. Anyone remember what was the most effective gas? I bet you're going to get this wrong.
Mustard.
Used. I knew you were going to say that. Mustard was number 2.
Yellow.
What is it?
Garlic.
I bet some of you in this room have it at your house. Yes! Who said that? Chlorine, number 1. Have any of you just try this? If you have a pool at your house, open the chlorine and just take a big sniff.
I do that all the time.
By the way, don't do that. That was a joke. Chlorine was a weapon. You can see the gas masks. Those are adorable. There's something, I think they put this is serious, like they put a coconut in the filter. And that was supposed to prevent you from inhaling the
I thought it
the
was
gas,
just
which,
like chunks of charcoal.
yeah, it's something like that. Highly ineffective. But you can see the machine gun, right? Just brutal. One of my favorite all-time paintings. I saw the actual painting. This is in the Louvre, which is in Paris. Look at it. What are we looking at?
They're digging.
I mean, what are those things?
Are those people
Those are soldiers. That's right.
digging, running,
They're
fighting?
running and
Kind of
like,
marching,
those-
right? There's definitely sort of a cadence going on here. Are
Bowing.
they distinct from each other? Can you tell that that's Billy, but that's definitely not Billy, that's Charlie, and that's Tom? Or do they all kind of blend?
Their uniform.
Yeah, they're uniform, they're all the same. They're nobody. They're nobody. They're just a thing. I mean, look at their faces. They're sort of humanish looking faces. I mean, this guy, I think, has kind of got a face. Those look like eyebrows. But what happened to that guy's head? What is that? Where's this guy's head? Right? They're not human. Soldiers were not human. And I mean, look, they're just marching along. You can barely tell the difference between the uniform and the mud they're marching in. Right? Just the depressing that you see these. No, you hear about and you read about the glory of war and how grand it was and how noble, and you can hear the patriotic music. And then there's this version, which is a slightly different version of what war's like. War is marching. War is depressing. War is gray. War is dark. War is dank. War is boring. I'd call it mud. Okay, there, I'm done. Any questions? I'm happy to help you. Papers due tonight. I hope everyone has a lovely spring break.